Okay, here we are on the pilgrimage, a pilgrimage, not the only pilgrimage, but the one we're on. And this is the guidepost for March 2nd, 2023. Although you may be watching this at some other point, because I want to try to make a larger point here that we may want to use in another context. This has to do with the question, what's the point of all of this? I mean, you will hear us using terms like the eight orders or strange loops or the transformation octave or just conflict and these are various kinds of maps of how we understand the nature of reality. I want to talk to you at this point specifically about the eight orders and about strange loops. And around the question of why is these are hard concepts to get a hold of. Why would this even matter? Right? So this is a simple question that has a very complex answer, and it really is all about complexity. Right? Albert Einstein is known for saying, that you should always pick the simplest solution possible, but no simpler. Basically, what he's talking about there is that we are making sense of the world through the various cognitive maps, paradigms, frameworks, perspectives, whatever we call these things. Our brains have ways of thinking, heuristics that make sense of reality, and we can have very complicated ones or very chaotic ones. Or the simplest is best because simplest guarantees the best outcome, and it uses the least energy to be able to come up with it. The problem is that some problems are actually created by using a way of thinking, a way of making sense of the world that is simpler than reality and thus won't solve the problem. And so sometimes we'll need to look for a more complex way of making sense of things than the ones that we're accustomed to, the ones that are easy to use. So when we find ourselves frustrated, one of the things we can do is say, okay, well, maybe the way I'm thinking about the problem doesn't actually give me a way to solve it. And mostly we don't notice the fact that we get to choose how we're going to define the problem. So I want to pick a way of thinking about the problem that is both very as accurate as I can come to, and also allows me something that I can do that will genuinely create what it is that I need. Okay? So we have a number of cognitive maps that we can use. It's just like we have a folder full of ways of thinking about things. And okay, this problem is, how do I make a doctor's appointment? Oh yeah, here's the way I do that. So we have ways of thinking about things, ways of understanding reality, and thus ways of behaving that gives us particular outcomes. So I want to suggest to you, and this is not my framework, this is a pretty well established framework that says that there are multiple kinds of or categories of cognitive maps. They are simple, they are complicated, they are complex, and they are chaotic. Now we think chaotic, that's chaotic is just beyond us. And in fact, it is beyond the human mind. Most humans that I know anyway cannot think in chaotic terms. But with the dawn of supercomputers, it discovers that chaos does actually have order to it. And so we can produce things like fractals and Mandelbrot sets, and we can see how it is that in the natural world, as we look around, we can see evidence of the impact of nonlinear equations on the development of reality in the natural world. But we can't do that without help. I mean, that's too much for us. So simple is a way of understanding things that says, okay, if this is the problem, this is what you do, and if you do it, you are guaranteed of getting a best result. Complicated says, oh, there is a possible best result, but it's not just one thing you have to do, it's a whole series of things. And in many cases, you have to do the series in the right order, and you have to do everything in that order, everything in that complicated sequence of events. You have to do them well enough that you get a good outcome. So if you're baking a cake, you have to actually break the eggs before you beat them into the batter. And you have to, so there's certain things that you have to do in order. If what you're doing is you're putting away the clean clothes that you're taking out of the dryer, you can fold them and then sort them, or you can sort them so you can switch up the order. But the best outcome is that the right clothes end up in the right drawers or on the right hangers in the right closet, and so that there's a certain best outcome. Complex, however, is a way of understanding the nature of reality that says there are multiple interdependent variables. That is, within what is arising here, if this changes, it changes that. And so this is a dynamic system, and any change is going to create a different outcome. And as a matter of fact, we can't predict what the outcome is going to be. What we do with complex systems is we recognize that certain strategies increase the probability of a particular outcome. Turns out hitting a fastball is not simple. It's not complicated. It's actually complex. And the things that you do if you're a big league baseball player is you do all of the things you need to do to increase the probability that you're actually going to be able to connect with the ball. But you can't be certain, whenever you get up to bat, that you're going to be able to hit the ball. Right? So there's a couple of differences between simple and complicated and complex and chaotic. One of the differences is that for a simple or complicated task, there really is a best outcome. So if my job is to go out, and you see that door behind me, if I'm going to try to leave the room, I'm going to open up that door. Now, as I approach that door, I could use my left hand or my right hand, and I can actually turn the knob in either direction because that's the kind of mechanism it is. But I can't push on it and get the door open. I have to pull. So there's certain things that I have to do. But it's relatively simple, and unless the door is locked, I pretty much guarantee that I'm going to be able to get to the outcome, right? So there is a best practice that will produce a best outcome. Same is true with complicated, except there's a lot more steps involved. But if you do the right things, you can actually build a bridge that will carry a several-ton truck. We know how to do that. Complex, we don't. And the thing about complexity is that small changes will make a huge difference. I can open the door with my left hand or my right hand, and it's really not going to matter. I mean, one may be a little bit easier than the other, but if I've got my hands full, I can use either one, right? But a small change in starting conditions in a complex system can make a huge difference. And this is a problem if we're trying to guarantee a particular outcome. But it's also very hopeful when we think, oh, there's nothing I can do. Well, actually, there is something I can do. And if I do what I can do and others are doing what they can do, together we can make a huge difference, right? So we got a bunch of maps here. We got a bunch of complicated and simple and complex and even to some degree chaotic maps. And we're going to try to make sense of the world through this. One kind of map that we use is a developmental map that says there are certain processes that over time we change how we relate to the world. So learning mathematics is a developmental map. We have to learn certain things in a particular order. You really can't do differential equations if you don't understand trigonometry, and in order to understand trigonometry you have to understand algebra, and so there's a bunch of things that you have to do. An infant will go from rolling over to sitting up to crawling to standing to walking to running. There's a certain sequence of events that will happen, and they will necessarily happen in a particular order. So these are various developmental maps, and there's lots of them. There were literally hundreds of them. Probably, depending on how you count, there may be more than that. At the back of Ken Wilber's book, Integral Psychology, he has 20 pages of various kinds of developmental maps. And one of the things that he's done there is he sets them up side by side so you can see how ultimately they're moving through the same kinds of processes as we go from one stage of development to another. So, what we have in the eight orders of being or the eight orders of self, the various varieties of this out there, what we have there is a map that I've created, which is kind of a summary of a bunch of other maps. I've tried to kind of pull all of these together in a way that makes sense to me and is relatively easy to remember. So it's both complex and it's simple, at least as simple as I can make it. Right? And it allows us to understand where it is that we are at any given time and figure out how it is that we might do something differently. So, for example, if the problem that I'm having is that I can't seem to keep a job, people keep firing me, I want to look at, because keeping a job is like a second order skill. I need to be able to earn an income, but it requires that I function at third order. And so I want to look to third order to say, what is it that I'm not able to do here? Am I not able to understand what my job is, what my boss is telling me to do? Am I not wearing the right clothes or smiling? I'm not showing up in such a way that this is actually working for me. Okay? Or it may be that I've decided about a particular way that I'm going to be, fourth order, but I can't get myself to do it because fifth order, there's some part of me that says, no, you don't want to be that way. And so I am at odds with myself. People who experience anxiety are experiencing fifth order conflict. So I can take antidepressants or I can take anti-anxiety medication, which will numb me, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. So depending upon where I am, whatever's going on with me, if I look to the developmental map and it says, oh, well, then this should be the next thing that you do. Because paying attention to my own interior is not necessarily going to help me kick my addiction. Might, because if I can get to that awareness, some people can do that. But the first thing that I got to do is quit drinking. I can't be aware of what's going on in me if I'm not sober. So there's a sequence that we have to move through, and developmental maps can help us figure out how it is that we're going to do that. Okay? Now, when people look at a developmental map, like the eight orders, they say, oh, where am I? And this is a little tricky because we're all at all the levels all the time. This is a map of being, not just of my, where I am on the race towards the top. But I will be, at any given time, dealing with problems at a particular level. And as we go through life and we solve life's problems and we're able to use more and more complex maps, we find our consciousness is evolving. It's moving to a higher level. So my capacity to be aware of what's happening is changing and may at any given time, be at a higher or lower level. But we're all at all the levels all the time. I'm 73 now. I've been working on this for a while. And one of the things I've noticed just within the last few weeks is that I'm observing transpersonal phenomena more than I used to. And I used to be able to say nobody lives at eighth order, but in fact, we all live at eighth order. We all live at all the orders all the time. We're just not aware of it. I had a guy in my office this past week it was as though if he doesn't have the feeling that other people have, then they're not feeling what they're feeling because he just has so little capacity to be aware of himself at fifth order. When I know that, okay, I'm not there yet, but I can be there, I'm going to work on being able to get to that place, then that gives me a way of beginning to address the persistent patterns of conflict that arise for me in my life. So the map is a way of helping us do that. So a second map is what we call a strange loop. And the strange loop is more of a way of thinking about how all of these levels, these layers, these realms, these, whatever we call the various aspects of being, is how they interact with each other. And the first piece is a loop. Everything is actually a loop. We think of things as static objects, but that's only because of the time frame in which we're looking at them. They don't appear to change, but over time they will in fact change. The river will change course. The mountain will in fact at some point wear away into a plain. But at the level that I'm at the time frame I'm looking at, they appear not to change. when we look at the atomic level, we can see that atoms are continually vibrating and pulsing, but they work together in such a way that objects appear static. They're not. Everything's dynamic. And every loop is made up of subloops and is a part of larger loops. So if we think about the nature of reality as loops, one of the things that does for us is it allows us to see the dynamic nature of being. Things are changing all the time, everywhere, for everyone. Now, there's another interesting thing that happens at loops. We can see a loop that arises at a particular level of being, a particular, we can call them stages of development, but a kind of density. So a relatively dense loop, so my physical body is a relatively dense loop. My relationship with somebody else is far more fluid. My feelings are way more variable than that. And so different layers of being have different different places on the gradient of density, if you will. But it turns out that what's happening at one level it can dramatically impact what's happening at another level. So if you have a lot of anxiety in your life, you may find your guts to be in an uproar, right? That our digestive system is impacted by what's happening for us emotionally. Most of us have had the experience of that. So all of the levels are operating all of the time everywhere, and they will impact each other. And it's that capacity for the higher orders to form the lower orders and the lower orders to form the higher orders that is the quality we call strangeness. Douglas Hofstadter, when he invented the term strange loop, he used some very specific examples of this that were kind of easy ways to get a hold of it. But once you begin to recognize strange loops, they're not novel, they're not unusual. Everything is a strange loop. But as we see the strangeness, the quality of strangeness of any particular loop, it gives us an opportunity to see it with greater depth and to know how to relate to it in a way that gives us more meaning. So I'm going to append to this a link to a video where I look at a particular example of a strange loop as a poem. All right? So strange loops are helpful for us as a way of thinking about the world because they allow us to understand it with greater depth. And there are myriad, everything's an example of that. And so I'll try to give you more of those. But the point is that when I'm trying to understand my life and to make the best possible choices, to the degree to which that I understand what's happening, I can actually think about reality in such a way that it makes sense to me. I'm making meaning in ways that are real, and they actually give me something that I can do to relate to reality in such a way that I increase the probability of the outcome that I'm looking for. That as I'm dealing with reality as complexity, not just as a simple, if you want this, you do that. Now, if you have a map where it says, if I do this, it gets me that, and that's what I want, cool, do it. Don't waste the thinking to try to complexify something that's actually very simple. But if you can't solve the problem, it may be, almost certainly is, that the way you're thinking about the problem does not reveal itself to you in such a way that there's something you can do to solve it. So that's just what we're doing in pilgrimage. We're looking at what's happening and what's arising in my life and how can I make meaning of it and how can we support each other in making meaning such that we have the best quality of lives for ourselves. We have the deepest, most intimate and safe relationships with each other. And we're functioning in the world in such a way that the whole creation benefits. That's who we are on pilgrimage, and I hope to see you Thursday. Take care.